What's up everybody, my name is Brendan and this is BigBearB Creative. Welcome back everybody to another Friday landscape photography video. Today is going to be a little bit more for the beginners in terms of the tutorial that we're doing today, but also is going to be great to help kind of remind yourself of how to go about it, and that's going to be about long exposure photography. I keep having to re-record this part because I keep calling it just landscape photography. It's obviously landscape photography, that's what you guys are here for. So long exposure photography, and we're going to break it down into two separate things. That one is going to be camera equipment, where you need to actually produce long exposure photography, and then the second being settings that you need to actually produce long exposure photography. So we're going to start off with the first one, and that's going to be the equipment, because obviously with photography you're going to talk about equipment all the time. It's necessary to get certain kind of things. So obviously you're going to have the base of all photography. It's going to be a camera, your lens, and a tripod. You always need a tripod to make sure you're getting steady shots. With some kinds of photography you can go without a little bit of a tripod, but that's always there to help you. It's a great thing to have. With long exposure photography in general, you have to have it. It's a must, otherwise you ruin your shots. So those are the three bases that you're going to need, but you're also going to need a couple supporting items. So those supporting items are these two things. Well, things that are inside this is case, but you're going to need some lenses, and you're going to need a remote shutter release. So let's talk about the lenses first. So with the lenses, there's a couple different options that you could go about in terms of shape. So you're going to have the circular ones, which is what I currently have. There are these ones. Don't worry, I'm not actually touching the glass. My fingers aren't touching the glass. But these are going to be your lenses, and there's a couple different kinds of ones you get, and that goes with the same for both of them. I don't have the other kinds that you could get, but that's basically going to be a square rectangle lens that they're big sheets of glass. There's a kind of a mounting system with filters, not filters, but adapter rings that'll go on each kind of lenses, which is why I would prefer getting those rather than these circle ones, because with landscape photography you're going to have at least two different lenses, a wide angle and a more telephoto. So typically the difference between those two is that the actual lens millimeter is going to be different. So for currently, both of the ones that I use, they happen to both be a 52 millimeter, which works perfectly because the only lenses or filters that I have are 52 millimeter, so it works great. But a lot of times you go into more of the higher end lenses, the more expensive ones, the ones that produce really nice photos. Those are going to be varying different sizes. Some will be 77 millimeters, some will be 82. And you don't want to have to buy a whole bunch of these to fit every single one of your lenses. That's the perks of the square and rectangle ones, that basically just have those adapter rings. They go into any of the size lenses that you have, and then a little kit goes on the front of that, and then you just slide in the actual filters. Works great. But either way, you're going to need some filters. So there's three different kinds of filters that you're going to need. That's going to be a polarizer, which is the one I was just showing you. That was a polarizer, and that's basically going to kind of bring out a little bit more color. It's going to cut through glare that you might have from early sunrise or fog or something like that. We'll cut through that, and it also will take away some of the reflection. So if you see all those photos of like lakes or rivers or something, but you can see the rocks underneath the water, it's using a polarizer to cut out the glare that's on the top of the water so you can actually see through it, which is really cool. You're also going to need that for long exposures. In addition to, you have two options. You have a solid ND filter or a graduated ND filter. And the difference between the two is the glass that you're using is either going to be solid black or it's going to be black to clear, which will allow for various different things. If you're shooting in midday, you'll probably end up wanting to use the solid black, the non-graduated filter, the solid black one. That will work great, and there's different stops you could use to make things darker for your long exposure to last longer, which again we'll talk about more in the settings. But yeah, so those are the two options: graduated versus solid, I guess you could call it. Not graduated, but like the graduated you would use more if there's a lot of sky in the shot, but the thing that you're actually capturing at the bottom isn't that bright, but you need to balance the light to make sure you don't have things overexposed and underexposed, and also to make sure you don't have to do exposure blending. You could use those. Works fantastic. But those are your two options for filter. Yeah, I guess you could say two options. The circle and the square are your two options for filters. Now the next piece of equipment is the shutter release remote, which is again really important because it allows you to actually have a long enough exposure time, because cameras, whenever you're actually setting it, the longest it could go by itself is 30 seconds, which you, for the most part, you won't have to go past. But if you're doing astrophotography, which is a form of long exposure, you very well might need these to have that exposure time. But in addition to actually exposure time, camera shake. This cuts down on camera shake, which is very important to make sure you're actually getting a nice clear, sharp image, as well as the exposure, the long exposure part, which is typically water. It could also be clouds or stuff like that, but those would typically be the two things that you're taking a photo of that would require you to do a long exposure, which this will help out with by making sure everything else is sharp while you're getting that motion blur of the things you're actually trying to have in motion. So really helpful, really cuts out. You don't necessarily need one of these, but they're like 10 bucks on Amazon. So you might as well go ahead and get that and make sure you're producing high quality images. So those are the 5 pieces of equipment that you definitely have to have. Let's say 5 roughly, because the filters, you could have a lot of filters, but 5, I guess, categories that you're gonna need. And that's gonna be the tripod, your camera, your lens, shutter remote release, and filters, which again, a lot of variety out there. So all the camera equipment that I use, you guys could check out in the description box below. I have them all linked. They're Amazon affiliate links. Get you something at the same price you normally would, but also helping support me. I'd very much appreciate it. But yeah, all those linked down below. But the next thing, the second thing about long exposure photography, besides just the equipment needed, is know actually how to take it. Now, I have a whole video explaining what shutter speed is and how you can use it to kind of get the exact looks you're going for, but long exposure all has to do with shutter speed. So typically long exposure is just, you're capturing the movement of time. Now it could be an object, or I guess you could say water is an object. Like I said earlier, water, clouds, anything like that. You're capturing movement of your subject. So with the long exposure photography, it's all about that shutter speed. So you need to make sure that you're having a long enough shutter speed to capture the motion of your subject. So to do that, you really just need to make sure that you have a proper shutter speed that will give you a good exposure. Now, before you go setting your shutter speed, there's a couple things you need to do first, and that's to set your aperture and your ISO. And then also focus. You should set your focus before you put your filters on, because sometimes that might mess with your camera, especially if you're using autofocus. If you're using manual focus, it shouldn't be too difficult, but it will sometimes mess with your camera's automatic focus. So if you're using that, set it before you put in your filters. But then after that, go back and set your aperture and your ISO. And your ISO should always be as low as it could go, the base ISO of your camera. That's going to produce the highest quality image because you're not producing noise grain. It's going to come from ISO, and again, I talked about that in the ISO tutorial I did too. So if you guys are interested in the ISO tutorial, check that out. But yeah, you want to make sure your ISO is as low as you can go. And your aperture needs to be set for the kind of look that you're going for in your photo. Typically with landscape photography, we want everything in focus. So that's going to be anywhere from f8 to f16. For this, I would say f11, f8, whatever gives you the sharpest image on your camera, stick to that, because you most likely aren't going to be taking anything with so much depth of field, so much range you want to get in sharp. That's actually going to be a long exposure. So an f8 to f11 will work perfectly fine. Then you have those two set. Now what you can do is actually look on the back of your camera, and you'll see this meter that on the right side is going to have some lines that goes to a plus, and on the other side I'll have some lines that go to a minus. Now the way that you want to use this is it's basically your camera's telling you if you're properly exposing your actual shot. So if you have lines going in front towards the plus, you're overexposing something. However, if you have lines that are going towards the minus, you're underexposing something. So try to get it to where no lines are showing on either side. Then take your first test image. See how that looks. Are things overexposed in some spots, or things underexposed in some spots? Then go from there and adjust as needed. Of course, using your filters here can help, especially those graduated ones. If certain areas are being overexposed, use a graduated filter to help darken that area, and then try the exposure again. Now, you'll probably have to play with this a little bit, but as you do long exposure more and you take more long exposure shots, you'll get much quicker and easier at this. There's a bunch of different apps you could also use. I know Nisi, which sells or Nisi, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. They have an app that kind of goes along with the square filters that they sell. So basically you put in what your camera's telling you to take for your shutter speed, then you put in the actual filter that you're using, and then it'll give you the proper exposure time that you should use for a correct exposure. Again, still with that, you'll want to kind of adjust as needed there, but it's all about just getting that based and then adjusting. Now, sometimes even with the filters and without the filters, you're just never going to get a perfectly exposed image. Sometimes you can have too much in the highlights, that they're a little overexposed, too much in the shadows that you can't really get any detail. So what you could do there is start to exposure blend, which I did a whole bunch of videos on this, I think last month, maybe the month before, but basically you're just taking two photos, in this case, two long exposure photos. One's going to be exposed for the highlights to make sure those are properly exposed, and then take another one for the shadows to make sure those are properly exposed. And then when you go into your photo editing software, you blend them together. If you guys aren't sure how to do that, I just did a video last week showing you how I did that on one of mine, so you guys can check that out. Again, I'll throw it up in the card. I think the card's over here. Pretty sure it's over here. You guys can check that out and see how I do it there. I said that weirdly, but how I do it there. I use Luminar 3, but it's the same kind of concept for any kind of photo editing software that allows you to do any photo blending. So that's really the basis of everything you need to know for long exposure. You need to know that you need those 5 pieces of equipment, 5 because filters again vary, and you need to remember that it's all about your shutter speed, and you could have it be as quick or as long as you need to capture the kind of look that you're going for. Now, if you're going for a certain look, which means you need a 10-second timer, but it overexposes, a couple different things you guys can do is try to close in your aperture. So if you're at f8, try going up to f11, even up to f16, which will mean that you could have that longer exposure time to give you a proper exposure. There's a couple different things you can play with there, but if you just can't get to that 10-second time that you want to get that kind of look, it's too bright, you're gonna need to invest in some filters. I will say filters can be very expensive, but they are very well worth it. So make sure you guys are checking all those out. Like I said earlier, all my camera equipment is always gonna be linked down below for you guys. If you have any questions about long exposure, if you want me to explain something a little bit more, kind of help you guys out with any questions you have, feel free to reach out to me. You could comment down below. You could even message me on my social medias. I'll display it in here for you, and they're, again, always going to be linked down in the description box below. I'd love to help you guys out if you do have any questions, or if you guys have any other questions, not about long exposure, but something else about landscape photography that you would like some help on or some tips on or something. Please feel free to reach out. I'd love to help you guys. So if you guys enjoyed this video, if you learned something here, make sure you guys are helping me out by bear-pawing that like button down below. Again, like I said earlier with the commenting, it lets me know that you guys are enjoying this, and it also helps promote to other people who are looking for the same kind of content as well. And we do landscape photography videos every Friday, and as often as I can, I do more of a landscape photography photo editing video, whether we're just editing together or I'm showing you a specific way to edit something. I'll throw those out again as often as I can every Sunday, or not every Sunday, but as many Sundays as I can. So make sure you guys are subscribing if you do enjoy this kind of content. So thank you guys for watching this video. Hope you guys have a great day. Be safe during this time, and go be creative.